Please take your seats. Our program will resume shortly. Please take your seats. Our program will resume shortly.
We want to know what you think. Polling will take place through the Bloomberg New Economy Forum app later in the program. Don't forget to download the app, available in all app stores. For more information, stop by the help desk on the first floor.
Please take your seats. Our program will now resume. Please welcome Minister of State of the United Arab Emirates and Group Chief Executive Officer of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al Jaber, President and Chief Executive of Dangote Industries Limited, Aliko Dangote, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of ExxonMobil, Darren W. Woods, Chief Executive Officer of the Uganda National Oil Company, Dr. Josephine Wapakabulo, and moderating today's discussion, the head of content at Bloomberg New Energy Finance, Ned Bullard.
Welcome back, everyone. Take a seat, please. So we've been having discussions about economy and about trade and about the future of work. And underneath all of those things, there has to be some energetic force. There has to be something to make them actually go. Energy is the ability to do work. And so it's very important as we talk about the new economies and the future of what growth is going to look like to figure out how exactly we're going to power that and fuel that and everything else. So what I'd like to do in this discussion is work through in fairly rapid-fire fashion a number of questions that go along with that. Supply and demand, what the nature of the company is going to be looking like, how we think about workforces, and how we think about this in a ever more volatile and ever warmer climate. So let's start with a bit about the supply side. And with that, Darren, I'm going to look to you. Tell me, as you look at this new economy's future, how you were thinking about providing the supply that it's going to need.
Well, I think if you look at the industry as a whole, supply is a function of what the demand looks like. And so a lot of talk about the new economy, but as you go out in time and look at the demand growth associated with GDP growth, associated with people's standards of living growing, there's a significant increase in demand, which then is going to prompt a drive for additional supply. On the supply side of the equation, I think the resources are there. One of the things that has changed the game pretty substantially is the unconventional oil out of the U.S. It is a new supply source, a very large supply source that's growing pretty rapidly. And so I think, in my mind, the big change that we've seen in the industry here in the last decade or so has been the unconventional oil and the productivity of the fields that we're seeing out in West Texas and eastern New Mexico, and how rapid that supply is coming on.
Aniko, tell me a bit about your plans on the side of supply for energy.
Well, the biggest challenge that we have is actually, the incoming, the supply of petroleum products. Because, as you know, in Nigeria, most African countries, we actually export, we export crude and then we import finished products. But in terms of the world supply, I think, there are more demands all over the place. And I don't really think that oil will crash in the next 2-3 years. Obviously, yes, I know that there's a lot of talk about electric cars and all this, but I mean, for us in the African continent, we are long way away from electric vehicles. It's going to take a very, very long time for us to, that's why we are now taking the opportunity to build a refinery, because we have looked at the entire sub-Saharan Africa. We only have about 2 working refineries, one in South Africa, one in Cote d'Ivoire, which is very, very small. And that's why we're building up a huge capacity of 650,000 barrels per day, refinery, to be able to take care of the demand of Nigeria and some few African countries, around with petrochemicals and all this.
Mm-hmm. Josephine, I believe you also got a refinery in planning.
Yes, so I could build on what Mr. Dangote said. Regarding supply, Uganda is a new frontier. So we are about 4 years away from actual production. We've got about, in the current blocks that have been licensed, we've got about 1.4 billion barrels recoverable, but that's only 40% of the potential. We still have 60% unexplored. And what has been explored, there's still 90% unlicensed. So there's a supply growth opportunity for us. But as everyone's touched on, the issue is demand. And I think, speakers earlier mentioned about growth in Africa, and our demand at the moment is growing at 7 to 9% every year. And that's driven by population growth primarily. So on the supply side, we're new. We're coming into the market. On the demand side, we're actually growing very fast.
In our view, the prospects of the value chain of our industry is in fact very robust, solid, and strong. And therefore, we in Abu Dhabi and through the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company have been very optimistic and in a way bullish about the market situation. We do know of the fact that there is real growth around the globe, but there will be an unprecedented growth seen and experienced here in this part of the world, especially in India, China, Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia. And as such, we as a major oil-producing nation, we have taken a bold decision to advance our developments and through our explorations We have only announced yesterday that we are going to be increasing our oil production to 4 million barrels by 2020 and to 5 million barrels by 2030. The same applies to our gas developments. We are aiming to achieve self-sufficiency and for us to become a net exporter, while we also are doubling our refining capacity and tripling our petrochemicals capacity. So as far as the market is concerned, in our view, the market is actually physically very stable. I think it is only the emotions that are somewhat unstable.
Okay. Very good. Let's talk a bit more about that notion of demand, because people think about demand for a barrel of oil, but it fractionates. It turns into all sorts of other things. And the history of the barrel of oil over time is that it's met different demand for different products over time. So, Darren and then Amiko, I'd like to hear from you both on sort of what your vision is of what happens to the molecules. What molecules are we going to be making and where are they going to be going?
Well, if you come back to the demand scenario and you look at what's driving demand, so you start with, and we tend to look at, as you know, the horizon for our industry is pretty long, so we tend to look out to 2040 and what's happening there. GDP is expected to double in that time frame. About the middle class is expected to grow by about 80%. It's about 2.5 billion people. Both of those things, growing economies and people's standards of living improvement, drive demand. Demand for energy will grow by about 25%, and think that's primarily due to the impact of efficiencies, because typically energy demand grows in line with GDP growth. So you'd expect about double of energy demand in line with the GDP doubling, but in fact, efficiencies limit that to 25%. You look at the three big sectors and what you see happening. Power generation is a huge demand driver and is a big percentage of the growth that you're seeing. Transportation, primarily in heavy-duty transport, which again is linked to economic growth, is another big factor. And then industrial demand growth. So those are big drivers. If you look at the mix and what you see with this increased electrification and power gen, LNG and gas is going to be one of the fastest growing fuel sources. Wind and solar grow pretty fast, but it's from such a small base that it continues to be a very small part of the energy mix.
Well, you know, as you know, today there are over 645 million people that without, you know, electricity. And then when you look at it, especially like what Darren said, that, you know, the GDP growth, if you look at average African GDP growth, is about 4.5–5%. So with that, in Africa alone, when you look at our population, between now and 2050, the population will double. You know, so you are going to end up having almost about 2.5 billion people, you know, in the next, you know, 35 years or so. And then with that, you look at what is happening in India, you look at what is happening in China. So obviously there will be more demand coming into the market. Despite having all this, you know, I don't believe electric vehicles will actually, you know, wipe out the demand on, you know, oil. It's just not going to happen. Even if it's going to happen, you know, it will take time, not now.
My colleagues would say that between now and 2040, we'll have an erosion of demand. Right? We don't say the demand falls. We say that a certain amount of demand for the barrel of oil changes by about 7.5 million barrels per day. But if that change is happening, then what are you doing with that additional 7.5 million barrels globally with oil molecules? Something I'd ask you.
Well, there is a population growth. Petrochemicals will need 60% more than the current supplies of oil to ensure that such downstream produce continue on its trajectory of very positive growth. And at the same time, we have to embrace the new emerging technologies. We in Abu Dhabi, for example, have taken a comprehensive view and a holistic approach to how do we adopt these different mix of technologies in one ecosystem. So today, while we continue to be a major oil-producing nation who is aggressively pursuing more gas and more petrochemicals and more refining, we also encourage the adoption of renewable energy because that will allow for us to capitalize on the commercial opportunity coming from gas. So introducing renewable energy, whether it's solar or wind, as part of our energy mix, to us is only a commercial proposition, and it makes perfect sense, and we can simply do it. And that's why we are pursuing renewables in parallel of conventional energy. And we do see this happening and unfolding in many, many areas around the world.
So I certainly see it occurring sort of economy-wide. But how do you think about it from a company perspective? Is it something that you would encourage to take in-house, or is it something that you have peer companies that are doing? So at the economic level, it's happening, but not at the company level.
Well, again, ADNOC on its own is very much focused on its core competency, and that is hydrocarbon industry. Right. Yet, one of our sister companies, who's also owned 100% by Abu Dhabi government, called Masdar, which I happen to be the chairman of, is the one that has been proactively seeking a key role in the renewable energy space on a global level. And in a very short period of time, Masdar has been able to really demonstrate a unique capability in advancing renewable energy through scale and applying capital.
And Josephine, as you think ahead, once you're producing, what else might you be doing besides just oil and just refined?
Well, I mean, it's all driven by the energy mix. So, as the Uganda National Oil Company, our imperatives are driven by the strategic direction of the country. So right now, the energy mix for Uganda is still 90% biomass, which is essentially firewood and charcoal. And that's not sustainable with a population growth of 3 to 4% a year from 42 million people. So as the National Oil Company, obviously we see a way to substitute that dependence on biomass through hydrocarbons. So we're building a smaller refinery than Mr. Dangote, about 60,000 barrels per day, up to 60,000. And that's driven by, we need LPG, we need HFO. But as a country at large, we have about 1.4, 1.5% driven by electricity. So a portion of that is solar, but still very low. But as the National Oil Company, we would be looking at other ways to drive that spread so we remove the dependency on biomass that's sort of growing at the moment at a level that's not sustainable. Thank you.
So one of the things that's unusual about having a conversation about energy is you get to deal with some companies of some vintage. So as we were chatting about in the green room, we have one company here founded in the 1870s. We have two founded in the 1970s, if I recall correctly. And then we have one founded in 2016? 2015. What's intriguing about that is obviously it shows a lot of durability, not only in the need for energy, but in the nature of the organizations that have managed to last all that long time. And so I'm curious, given that you're able to think ahead as energy is a sector for another century, what's the nature of the organization and how do you think about the workforce that goes with it, not just in wherever your home country is, but globally? And Darren, I'll look to you first for that.
Well, I think it comes back to the way we think about our business is it's a demand-driven business. We're responding to the demands of society, and we do that by focusing fundamentally on technology. People talk about the energy transition that we're going through. Frankly, since we established our company, we've been going through an energy transition. It's just been happening over a very long period of time. And our ability to respond to that energy transition is the technology evolution, the innovation, the invention that we do in the company. Today, we invest about $1 billion a year in R&D. And we think that is, and we do that pretty consistently through the cycles, because we feel like that's an important foundation for supporting the business and responding to evolution in the markets. We bring people in that are science and engineering based, and then our secret for keeping people in the company is giving them responsibility early in their career to run very large businesses. We're a global business, so they have a kind of a global opportunity set in front of them, and I think that hasn't changed over the course, certainly of my career, and I think as we go back in time, people, when they come into a company, they want to feel like they're making a difference, they want to contribute, they want responsibility, and they want to be recognized for what they contribute, and that's how we have designed our systems, how we compensate and motivate our folks, and I don't think that's going to change, quite frankly.
Where is that R&D going, and how has that changed?
Well, we have a pretty broad spectrum of R&D. One of the areas that we've been focusing on here over the last several years, when the IPCC came out, we had started participating in the science of climate change from the very beginning, with an understanding that as society's understanding of the impact of fossil fuels and emissions and carbon into the atmosphere grew, we understood the implications of that, much more emphasis on how you decarbonize. Our view is We're a company that understands the energy system. We've been involved in it for a long time. We understand the scale of it, and we have the technology to address it. So our perspective is we can contribute in that space, and we've been putting R&D dollars into that space. So we're looking at how do you change the processes in our plants to become more energy efficient, to use less energy to make the conversion that we do. We're looking at carbon capture and storage and new technologies to capture carbon. How do you utilize carbon into different forms? We're looking at algae as a substitute for liquid fuels and energy-dense liquid fuels for heavy. So we're putting a lot of dollars into areas that we think are going to help society transition to a less carbon-intense fuel system. Very early in the cycle, and that's the way R&D works. One of the advantages that we have as a company is we take a very long-term view. If you're going to pursue fundamental science, you got to have the patience and the timeline to let that work reach its conclusion.
Sultan, how about you?
I'm sure you've heard about the transformation that we have been undertaking in ADNOC. This very specific topic actually sits in the heart of our transformation. In fact, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, emphasizes this very specific point. And he always says, investing in our people today is our future prosperity. Now, and the way we've done this in ADNOC, in a company with its importance, how critical ADNOC is to our continued economic growth in the country, and the fact that ADNOC does actually act as the spinal cord of our economy, we've taken a step back and we've built on the experience of many of our strategic partners like ExxonMobil and many others. And we've developed a good understanding of what is actually required in order for us to continue to play a very important role in a very evolving and advancing sector, that is the energy sector. So we did it in a 3 parallel track way. One is the track that is very much centered and focused on human development. The second track is the fact that we have today a very clear R&D strategy, and a track that is centered around and focused on a technology roadmap. Of course, this triangle, they work in harmony, they work in a very clear, coordinated manner, and this is a new introduction to a company like ADNOC. And in a very short period of time, by only applying this approach in a company like ADNOC, we've seen so much benefit in terms of efficiencies, increasing our profitability, ensuring high performance across the company, and the fact that we've been able to introduce a very sophisticated new technology like artificial intelligence and how we operate and how we conduct business across the value chain of our business is in fact very encouraging, and the results we've been able to receive in a very short period of time are very motivating.
Tell me a bit more about what that AI application is then, because I'm curious.
You know, we are a very large company. We're about a 50-year-old company that our business spans the whole value chain. We run operations onshore and offshore. We have many oil rigs and gas operations onshore and offshore. And before, in the absence of having one integrated system that will give us, as the decision makers in the company, access to the whole operation with one glance at one lens and one screen, it would take us some time to get access to the information and to validate this information against other data in order for us to be able to make the right decision. Today, with one glance, one screen, one glance on one screen, in a split second, we can make a call. And that has been, in fact, an instrumental in helping us advance the organization in a very sophisticated manner and helping us drive efficiency, drive our cost of barrel down, and enhance our profitability across the group.
Mr. Dangote, how about you? How does resource versus technology play for you?
Well, you know, we are very new in the oil and, in the energy market. You know, we are doing a couple of, projects. What we are doing now, we're actually, trying to have synergies with other company corporations. You know, we're talking to Sabic Industries when it comes to our fertilizer and our, gas-related, polypropylene, polyethylene, because we are doing a plant that will produce about 1.3 million tons. And, Sabic Industries, they have quite massive, R&D, in about 6 locations. So we're actually partnering with them in that aspect. but majority of the workers that